Hello and welcome to the Story Engine podcast. My name is Kyle Gray, and today on the show we have Nancy Bisbikos. She is the founder and creator of the Biko Method, which helps people discover, uncover, and transform limiting beliefs and behavioral patterns that sabotage the lives of so many people in so many ways. She's worked with Olympians, champion golfers, executives, but this is something that anybody can learn from and benefit from. So without any further ado, let's uncover our subconscious patterns with Nancy Bisbikos. Nancy Bisbikos, welcome to the Story Engine podcast.
Thank you for having me. You look great. For our listeners, Cal is wearing a navy-ish shirt. Looks so lovely as ever.
It's good to be comfortable. You're looking great. We're both sounding great. And I would love to hear from you to get yourself properly introduced to all of the listeners who are excited to meet you. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how you're showing up in the world today?
Of course. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called the Biko Method. And what we do is we have a wellness approach that is designed to identify and clear subconscious blocks. And we use that to support transformation and performance.
Amazing. Who, when you say like identify clear subconscious blocks, I know a lot of us run around with these things all of the time, and they're kind of hard to find and identify. A lot of the people that I work with, they have their own versions of this that helps or that causes them a little bit of trouble in picking the right story. But a lot of these things are difficult to notice. So like, how do these things stay hidden, and how do you what are some examples of these blocks?
Great question. 15 years ago, we made a discovery that there was a pattern or a program that creates and brings up limiting beliefs. And this can be as simple as you going to give your mom a hug and she's busy or she's cooking dinner. In that moment, it's a high pressure environment, especially for a child. And that child might create a story or a belief that they're not lovable or they're not good enough. And it sounds so silly to really think about it because the mind prefers accurate or safety over accuracy. And so you'll grow up thinking that belief is your truth and you'll live through that lens and you'll create coping mechanisms. Like you might be overly nice or you might work really, really hard in order to not feel the pain of that moment. And as you grow older, it becomes more complex and high pressure situations become more in line with your age. But this program gets brought up whenever things skew from how you're naturally thinking. So basically the way that we live our life is due to this programming that our minds have created to keep us safe, essentially.
It's amazing the impact of this. And I can think of one moment in particular. I've always put a lot of pressure on myself, which I know is rooted in exactly one of these things. But I can remember a few years ago when I was living on the big island of Hawaii, and I was experiencing some money struggles, and I was really, really frustrated. And I remember receiving a book, and it was called the Adult Children of Alcoholics Manual or Handbook. And at first I was like, my parents weren't alcoholics. They didn't have any substance abuse things. No problem. Why am I reading this? And I read the first page of that book and my jaw dropped. And it was many of the patterns that I'm sure you see all of the time. And I learned something really important. Is though my parents weren't alcoholics, both of their parents were, and they learned how to adapt and cope and deal and had their own version of these patterns. And then they grew up with me, or I grew up with them, more accurately. And even though there wasn't an alcoholic present in the house, there were these coping mechanisms that they used to deal with themselves and their life that I learned, and I learned how to be safe. And I see it and I feel this struggle so deeply in so many ways of really like fully speaking my truth in many different situations, from high ticket sales to relationships to friendships, leaning into conflict instead of or immediately trying to placate conflict. And Yeah, of course, just constantly thinking or believing that I'm not good enough. And from that, making choices that are founded in anxiety rather than abundance or curiosity or excitement. And yeah, like while these things sound subtle or woo, they can add up tremendously in your life without you ever noticing it. And you'll just think it's fate.
Mm.
This is a really deep uh, way of working on things. And like I've seen it impact in my life in many ways. And I'm sure you see this adding up in many different ways in the people you work with.
Yeah, actually, my first experience, this is not where I thought I was going to go, but when I was in aviation school, I remember the classroom that I studied in had very small rectangular windows, and I didn't have nail polish at the time for many of the classes. I remember every time I walked into the class, my nails would turn blue and I felt like I couldn't breathe. And I went home and I didn't understand what was happening. And so I talked to my parents, and they had said that most of my family on my dad's side passed away in concentration camps through suffocation. And so I read a book that talked about how when we experience trauma, the part of our brain responsible for speech shuts down, and we don't have physical language to bring it up because our brain and our body go into fight or flight response. And so we have all this trauma, and trauma is just something that deviates your natural way of thinking, but we have these experiences that are in our bodies in ways that we can't explain, and then they get passed through generations, and we don't have the language or the means to bring it up because our mind is designed to move forward. And so these experiences from the past become our reality, and we pass it on, and that's we move through the world in that way. And so as I'm thinking about your experience, I'm thinking, now that I learned about this program, we call it the emotional footprint program. I'm thinking about, how your mind, there's something called like that we've called like addiction from a neurochemical standpoint, and it shows up a lot in alcoholics. But the interesting thing is that, say, for example, your grandparents were alcoholic, the way that your parents dealt with that creates kind of like this paradigm because they kind of try and skew the other way. I mean,
Yeah. I have been addicted to anxiety, and I have been addicted to these negative feelings and as like a coping mechanism.
and they'll create that chaos not knowingly, wanting, that satisfaction from whatever comes after the chaos. I noticed this in my life when I remember going to the gym was big for me, and you can kind of start seeing, we studied the different neurotransmitters, but before the gym I would always find a problem, and it seems the mind always is in alignment with your beliefs. And so in my mind it made perfect sense, like there was something laying around the house that I didn't like, or I don't know, I was going to be late. There is a problem that I created in my mind that matched perfectly with my experience in order for me to have a good time at the gym. When you kind of create a baseline, you clear these emotional footprints, you clear the addiction from a neurochemical level, then you just have neutrality. And that way you can kind of control where you want to put your energy into.
Problems described. It was almost like genetically, or there was something deeper. What's going on there?
I would say, so we coined these programs emotional footprints, but they show up in many different ways and they can be released in many different ways, kind of like all roads lead to Rome kind of thing. But with that, when we do our modality and we go into a session, we can clear these blocks essentially in the fastest way possible. So without having to revisit the story, without having to relive the pain. So I would say from that perspective, that would be clearing the emotional footprints from a sensation point of view because I don't have the language for it. And then there's other times where I can cognitively feel and see what's going on through repetition. When you repeat something so many times and you're like, wait a second, like I'm seeing it on a conscious level. Some things are subconscious and some things you repeat so many times where they become part of your conscious awareness.
Hmm. I'd love to hear about like who are some of the people you work with? Is this for everybody? Are there a specific group that really gets the best benefits? Are you really specialized working in? Who works with you?
So we've been doing this for 15 years. And for the first 12 years, we did transformation. We did it for surgeons, people suffering from PTSD. We did a lot of phobias. And then we had a chance a few years ago while we were doing our clinical trials, because we needed the street cred, to partner up with Dr. Kevin Arnold and Dr. George. Yes, Dr. George Grant, and they were working with Olympians at the time. And so when we applied our work to them, we saw that they were performing better than ever. And they were jumping higher, running faster. And so we took the same methodology and transferred it to PGA golfers. And we saw again, there was a huge change in the way that they performed, their mental, golf is a very mental game. And from then we realized that we can use our methodology to drive performance. And our main target clientele is professional athletes and executives and organizations.
What are some of the most common symptoms that you notice that would point to having the emotional footprint that you describe?
From the gym perspective, when I describe the addiction, it would be being completely out of character or seeing a low and then a high. You see, it's kind of like a roller coaster. And then with executives and athletes, I would say for executives, you see a lot of imposter syndrome. You see burnout. You see people not rising they kind of sink to their level of training as opposed to rising to the occasion. A lot of insecurity, a lot of doubt. And then with athletes, you see that they sabotage themselves in moments of high pressure in a game or on the field.
And what kind of story do they have about, like, if I self-sabotaged myself in one of those moments of high pressure, what would I chalk that up to?
I'll tell it in story form, maybe
Mhm.
to make it easier. So if you're say there's a college basketball player and he misses a game-winning shot, there's a very big moment of pressure, and the mind will not want to relive that experience. There's a lot of chemicals, and so in a future game, maybe that person will pass. They'll get more turnovers because your mind is drastically trying to protect you from experiencing that pain all over again. And so you'll start doubting yourself, and then you'll kind of start going downhill. You like that person might stop trusting themselves as well. And they will definitely not be taking the game winning shot, or they might and they'll have to fight themselves on it. Or they might sabotage like their shooting so that they're not put in that position.
And not even really knowing it,
Mhm.
or I think one of the interesting things that come up that I've observed is you will trick yourself into somehow. This example is kind of strange, but you will trick yourself into thinking that missing the shot is noble. Or I can see this more likely in like an office behavior where many people will be totally enmeshed in this self-sabotage, but to themselves, they will truly and authentically feel like they're doing the right thing
Yes.
until the crash happens, which I think is fascinating and is terrifying in some ways, because I've found myself at many moments of my life since discovering this, like I can feel good and like I'm doing the right thing and driving myself off of a cliff, which yeah, can be scary.
I get it. I think it's so much in the subtleties. I had a client that was on a big panel and they didn't get business cards. They weren't networking enough. And we were in the session and they came to the conclusion that they didn't get the business cards because they were there to serve. And so it's very interesting that on one hand, you see that they didn't get the result that they wanted, but ultimately, when they cleared their emotional footprints, they saw that it was for a good reason. So sometimes you will do something and you need to completely trust that whatever you did and learn from it and see that it's taking you forward. And other times, there's the introspection of, hold on, this is self sabotage. No matter how good it feels, I'm not going in the right direction. And I think you eventually see that through repetition when you start getting the same results over and over again.
Mhm. Or you learn how to tune into yourself, because I think that's one of the most important distinctions that anyone could ever make is like, what is my inner voice and my inner truth, and what is this anxiety that is backseat driving my life, and what's really speaking right now. And I think very few people have the ability to tell that difference.
I would say, and I heard this before, but I would say that your intuitive voice or your intuitive self is very quiet, it's mellow, it's subtle. And the loudest voice in your head is usually not the one that you should be listening to,
Mhm.
as a general rule, for
Yeah.
myself at least.
So your process, one of the things that you said that is like unique or advantaged about this is that I don't have to revisit the story. Like so many people make me want to go back to the exact moment when I was 7 and something bad happened and to re-relate to that moment. And honestly, for me, like I've always had a difficult time with that because I don't think that maybe there are some true moments and maybe I am deceiving myself again and I'm just so good at like hiding and burying those things. But I sense that they're like patterns and behaviors that came over time. And so I like the idea of not having to revisit a specific story or dig up the same pain, which I'm sure a lot of people are happy about too. What are some of the other advantages? Not necessarily the outcomes that you get for people, but how you get me to those outcomes that's better that you would want to highlight.
We connect the conscious to the subconscious mind through statement, and we use the language of the subconscious in the way that it speaks and communicates in order to get to the result the fastest. So the language of the subconscious looks like identifying patterns, attachments, phobias, possibly behaviors and emotions. There's more, but that's just a start. And so where you can have a pattern of, say, self-sabotage, you don't have to be like, when I was 5, I fell in the park and Kyle laughed at me. And then I realized that, you don't have to go through the story. You can be like, oh, do you think there's a pattern in your life where you sabotage yourself? And so it's broad, but it's so specific in the way that when you identify that pattern and then you clear it through a statement, then everything that's related to that pattern clears and you don't need to revisit the story or the pain. It's just in the way that the subconscious understands what is happening, you can identify it and release it. Does that answer your question, kind of?
Yes, but I want another flavor. You've given me
Okay.
2 flavors now, and I want a third flavor of better, unique, or different.
Let's see. Well, if you think about it this way, if you no, you know what? I'll tell you this. So when I started my journey of growth and all that good stuff, I wanted to know absolutely everything. I was like, where does this come from? Am I angry at my mom for this? Am I doing this? I was really hurt, so now I protect myself. And in my mind, I was so satisfied by these things. And I remember when I was first introduced to the method, my husband came up with a discovery. He was like, "Hey, we're going to do this. How are you feeling right now?" And we traced it back. It took kind of 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And I realized that I was mad at my mom for doing something when I was little. And I was like, yes, I got it. And you feel this moment of intense joy, like you got it. You're figuring this out. You're moving forward. And he's like, all right, just give it a couple minutes. And I could feel that slowly dissipating, the satisfaction. And I could still feel the anger there. And he's like, all you're doing is bringing something up, but that doesn't mean that you can release it. And so that was the moment that I realized that there's a way faster way to the result. And if you think about, uncovering everything in your life is going to take half your life, most of your life, but there has to be a faster way, which is why this methodology exists.
So
Flavor
you
number
don't need
3.
to understand or intellectualize everything.
Correct. The subconscious is this crazy place where it's like everyone is connected from a scientific level and it understands way more than you could possibly conceptualize. Just like how monkeys in one region of the world will start eating bananas, and then in a completely different region, monkeys over there will start eating bananas. It's the subconscious process that we're barely starting to understand. The subconscious understands the process that you're doing and they understand this program. It's called the emotional footprint program, which is just what we named it. But your subconscious can release things so much faster because it understands what's going on.
Hmm. Okay. For the sake of a game and a little bit of fun and see if we can explore something a little different,
Okay.
getting results without having to revisit the story or pain is one.
Hmm.
Going straight to the subconscious to get results faster. And you don't need to intellectualize everything to get results. These are kind of like mango, pineapple, and passion fruit flavors. Can you give me like a chocolate flavor? So
So you
these are
mentioned all fruit, like you want like
exactly,
the
these are very
okay,
similar tropical fruits that are
got
very
it.
akin to each other. And I'm just curious if there is a really different thing that we could showcase out here. Because
Hmm.
these feel like cousins of ideas, and I think there's still more beauty to be discovered in your process that I want.
Okay. I wonder if it's the paradigm. So when there's an emotional footprint present, it's just the way that you see your life and the way that you've conditioned yourself. You will play out both extremes. So say that I don't know, you were victimized by something or you were a victim of an incident,
Hmm.
that is one side, like it's a one side of the equation. The other extreme is that you become essentially a bully. So you don't know where in the process you are, but when they say like if you believe that you're a victim, then you're the attacker at the same time, and you just don't know when that is. So you kind of bounce back and forth. So when like when these emotional footprints get triggered, no matter what side of the equation you are, you're always bouncing back and forth. And so your energy is haywire.
Hmm.
Chocolate or not chocolate? Mango,
Yeah.
pineapple.
Um, so what I hear is I can reclaim a tremendous amount of energy by knowing myself
Yeah.
and knowing where myself is. Because if I'm constantly going between bully and victim, then like it takes a lot of energy and I don't really know what's going on. It's hard to make good decisions or anything like that.
Mm.
Okay. So yes, that is a good additional flavor for me.
Okay, but you need to, it's not just enough to know yourself, because if you know yourself within the context of an emotional footprint, you might want to look at what is there. Do you feel like you need to be in control? Do you feel like you need to know everything? Do you feel like knowledge is the base that you live your life in? So you have to know when you're outside of that paradigm. And you
Hmm.
know either by clearing the footprint, and it's not just through our method. If you clear an emotional footprint, you can clear it naturally through a lot of repetition. We just do it the fastest. Like, I don't know if it's ever happened to you where you ruminate about something and you can't stop thinking about it. And then all of a sudden one day it disappears, or you're like, oh, I learned that lesson. And then you never go back to it again.
Hmm. Or
Yeah.
I definitely have a certain trauma response that maybe goes in the opposite direction of I feel I need to understand something perfectly before I talk about it with anybody. And it's really me just keeping myself safe and not being able to talk about it, because if I don't understand this thing perfectly, then if I start to talk about it, I'm not going to be in full control of what's happening. And so I will wait and I'll wait and I'll wait and I'll ruminate and I'll ruminate and ruminate. And that takes me in the opposite direction. That doesn't usually like reveal something to me. It just makes whatever problem or conflict I'm avoiding worse. But like pointing to what you kind of said of the need to understand and intellectualize, as I think this is like what many people do, and I've experienced a lot of men like this. We try to go into our heads and out of our body and try to be outsmart or outwork the things rather than experience them.
Yeah. That's not a whole nother thing in itself, but it's kind of in layers. You have to see what's in alignment and what's not in alignment, and where, because sometimes it's almost like going into your head will help in certain situations, and then other time you're propelling the pattern, and other times, say you need to know something fully before you explain it or before you do something about it, you'll do that over and over again, and you're like, I need to, things fully before you explain it. And then there's one moment where there's an opportunity. I always feel it like a release. There's an opportunity for you to explain something or move forward without knowing something, and then your mind is like, wait a second, nothing happened, we're safe. And it's not a conscious thing. You don't really think about like, oh, nothing bad is happening. It's more of a subconscious process. And then little by little, you'll start releasing that, unless it's part of the paradigm. So it's kind of hard to know unless there's a lot of repetition, or you understand how, or you build a relationship with the subconscious, and you know where it's going.
Or you have somebody brilliant helping you get out of your own way.
Yes, exactly.
So, speaking of somebody brilliant, I would love to hear about a moment in your life, a moment of self sabotage where you were feeling noble and then had this conflict happen, this failure, this challenge. You mentioned one with the windows. I think that's a beautiful one. Or experiencing imposter syndrome, burnout, and insecurity, and where you found yourself in a situation you didn't want to be in.
This one actually is pretty life defining. When I was introduced to this work, I was very sick. I could barely walk more than an hour a day. And I realized that I needed to do something different. And so I started clearing my emotional footprints, and I started feeling a lot better, and I started having more energy. And as I was getting healthier, I realized that the reason I was seeking growth was because I had to. I couldn't go on living like that. And so when you clear enough of these patterns that kind of dictate where you're going in life and how people show up and how you're showing up, you're faced with a choice. And the choice for me was, do I want to seek growth only when I need it, which means I'm retraining my body to get sick in order for me to absolutely have to look at something? Or do I choose growth as a way to move forward? And that's how I wire myself is whenever the opportunity shows up, you take it. And it was a very difficult decision because when it's almost a choice to see things for how they really are because it makes life a lot harder, but a lot richer. So I was faced with that choice and I chose growth and here we are.
So tell me, like, when this moment occurred on a specific Tuesday afternoon, and I was in this room and I was looking around me, and these things were happening, and I realized I had a choice.
I was in the middle of a session and I had stuff to do. You know, I was so excited. I could move, I could do things. I had stuff to do. I was like, I have this and I want to cook and I want to go to the gym. And my husband was like, look, this is the choice that you're faced with is that now you have a lot of things to do because you've cleared your emotional footprint. So in this moment, there's things that you're unresolved about. Will you choose the path of ignorance and go back to what you were doing because it's what you want to do, or will you choose the path that's showing up for you? It was really difficult. I was, I was very angry, but I think when someone paints a picture so vividly, making the wrong choice, not only does it not feel good, but I just think it doesn't feel good. Like when when you're faced with something and you have the choice whether to do it the same way you've always done it or differently, and almost like knowing propels you to do the right choice, not because it feels good, but because you know what you don't want.
Yeah, sometimes it has to take great anger or great pain. And what I'm hearing here is like there's layers to it, and it's probably there. I can sense like I thought I was fixed by now, and now there's this um
Yeah.
within this. What were some of the other like you have this and you're kind of like, I can go to the gym, I can go and do these things. What were some of the other symptoms, the limiting beliefs, the imposter syndrome, the burnout happening for you inside of this moment and this choice?
Mm, I was faced with my own selfishness, which we never want to do as people. It's hard to see ourselves as something other than the good guy or the protagonist of our own story. But I realized that when I needed something, I made things about me. And even though I knew better, because you know better, and you see that somebody is being affected by your choices, you kind of you don't care in that moment. It takes a lot, I think, in the beginning to be like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to face this. I'm ready to see what I was doing. And then once you go through it, I think that's where, and you can see physiological changes like your heartbeat drops, your heart rate, and you can, I don't know, you sleep better at night, I think.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hmm.
Now tell me about a moment of the opposite, maybe down the line, where you were feeling this alignment, this ease, this openness, this I am knowing myself and in myself, and I'm finally in control of my life, no longer at the whim of these emotional footprints.
I went to a personal development retreat, and the context of the organization is that they try and push you to your limit so that you can see what patterns come up for you. And the whole premise of what they teach is that you're always going to have a box full of your limiting beliefs and your patterns, but your box will just get bigger and bigger. So you'll be able to move forward and do what you need to do. And I just remember they were trying to upset us and trigger us. And, they make you scream from really high places and hit chairs. And I just remember not feeling a charge around anything and feeling at peace. And I realized that my neurology was different at the time. And there was nothing in me that called for a strong emotional response.
Tell me about some of the more details of the room or other things happening around you, and also like some of your inner thoughts.
I just remember, so this was the third part. There's a three-part series to this personal development retreat. And then the second kind of chapter, this is where I met Constantine, my husband. And I just remember that, when you set time aside to better yourself and you pay however much money, you want to do what they're asking of you so that you can tell yourself that you did the best that you could. And so I just remember the whole week I was tired and I was going exactly what they were telling me to do. And I just remember Constantine being so at peace. And I was so, I don't know why, but I was so angry about it. And I just thought in my mind, there's no way, like, who is this guy? Like, what is he peaceful about? This is not the time for that. So when I internalized it and conceptualized it, by the time like the third chapter was men and women separate, I realized what he was feeling when I had met him. Full
Mm.
circle moment.
So this was after this first moment, and you two had been together, and now you were upset that he wasn't upset, and then you saw the peace in him and in yourself in this moment.
Yes, I think I'm following, but yes.
Okay. This chronologically happened after the story you've already told me.
Yeah, before. So I met him, he was really at peace and I was like, "Who are you?" And then I went through this big transformation and then I went through the third chapter by myself and I realized that I was a completely different person. So the things that would have upset me before no longer upset me and the program almost seemed redundant. Like I was just there to hang out and eat the good food.
Okay. Okay. I think that makes sense. Um, are you ready to hear your story?
Yes, Kyle, I'm waiting for this.
I can remember a day that seemed like any other day. I was a successful entrepreneur, a successful coach, helping people overcome their patterns and their problems. I'd come a long way. I used to be really sick and I could barely walk for an hour a day. But now I had grown in so many different ways. And in a lot of ways, I had success. People were coming to work with me. I had a lot of our money was coming in and it seemed like things were right. But after the middle of the session, I found myself thinking, oh, I'm so excited to move. I can go to the gym. I can do this. I can do that. And I remember my husband pointing something out to me that there was a trauma response happening, something within me. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't settle down. I couldn't be in a moment. I was constantly thinking of where the next thing was. And in some ways, I was behaving selfishly. I didn't want to look at it or see it, but it was there. And I was always making things about me. And it took somebody outside of me, outside of these patterns that had been so well entrenched and so deep, to show me that there was a choice that I had, that there was another option that I never knew was out there, another layer. And I can remember being so angry at being pointed out at this. After all of the work I had done, after everything I had put in, there's another layer. There's something to be unresolved about. But I remember leaning into that choice. And this is exactly the same choice and the same thing that I see so many people going through every time and was inherent in this process. And the beautiful thing was within this choice, I didn't have to revisit every story from my childhood or dredge up all of the pain, that there was a way that I could get to the subconscious of this so I could get results faster without having to intellectualize or reclaim everything. And I realized that that allowed me to reclaim so much energy. What seemed like energy at first of me wanting to jump around and be all of these things, when I could actually focus it on being who I was and really living a life in alignment. And I continued to grow and develop in this. And this is something like that we're all doing all of the time. And I can remember being at a retreat, hearing this same thing, continuing to want to grow and develop myself and hearing them talk about the box of your limiting beliefs that you put yourself in, you never really get out of, you just make it bigger and bigger. I remember being at this retreat and people were actively trying to trigger me by breaking things, shouting, having all of these things happen. And what once would give me such a charge and would leave me feeling insecure or bring up these things that used to drive my life in every which way, I finally felt the ease. I remember feeling grateful for my husband for the first time that I saw him experiencing peace in moments like this, and for pointing out that slight way that I was out of alignment too. And you know, so many of you out there, whether you're surgeons, Olympians, golfers, executives, leaders of many kinds, these subtle things drive our lives and the results that we get in so many ways. They cause us harm while we're feeling like we're doing the right thing. And today I want to show you a simple system to get back in your own power, to become who you truly are, to reclaim so much of your energy to be doing what you actually want to be doing instead of serving these patterns. And I'm going to teach you about that today.
8 years later, Kyle, that was amazing.
Thank you. I hope it captures what we were looking for of not too big of a box and not too little of a box and not so simple and not so complex, because I know just from going through this process there's a lot to be talked about and explored for a lot of different people here.
I'm ready for my TED Talk.
Have you been doing a lot of speaking or anything like that to share moments like this before?
I've been on a few panels and a few events where I was asked to share a couple of my stories and our methodology. Nothing extensive. I think the longer I was offered to talk for 45 minutes, I just don't, I didn't think of, enough content, but it's on my list.
Maybe that's another one of these limiting beliefs right here.
I think so. I think it's also maybe I'll look into it, but I think it's also about understanding the value that I can bring to somebody and being prepared. Sometimes yes, sometimes it's about timing or other
Absolutely.
stuff.
Well, I'm so grateful for the timing that has led us to this moment in this interview. And the work that you're doing is deeply meaningful to me as I've seen myself uh, exhibit these same behaviors. And it's a process that I've been learning. And I think it, on the other side of this, is such a great freedom that so many people could benefit from. So, Nancy, thank you so much for sharing this with the world. Do you have any closing thoughts for us today, and where can we go to learn more about you?
Closing thoughts. Let's see, where can you go? It's www.biko.com. I guess young people don't do www. It's like HTTP. Anyway, it's just bicomethod.com. Closing remarks. I think everyone is doing their best, and knowing that your subconscious is always trying to support you, that's the whole premise and principle of our work. Knowing that brings a lot of comfort, because when there's moments of discomfort or emotions that are very unpleasant, it's just your mind trying to bring attention to something. And so looking at it from that perspective, that you're being supported as opposed to something unpleasant that you want to get rid of, it changes a lot.
Beautiful. Nancy Bisbikos, thank you so much for joining us today on the Story Engine podcast.
Thank you so much, Kyle.